I used to believe I knew my wife completely. After all, isn't that what love is about? Knowing the other person so well that their thoughts, their habits, their every essence feels like an extension of your own. For years, I thought I had her figured out. I thought I could predict her every reaction and understand her every mood. But I was wrong. You don't ever truly know someone until you share a space with them. And even then, there are parts of them, parts you'll never see, no matter how close you think you are. Rochelle had a side of her that I never understood, a side I only began to glimpse one night when everything changed. This is her own space. I met Rochelle at a nightclub. It wasn't the kind of place I usually went to, nor was it a spot I ever expected to meet my future spouse. But a friend of mine had dragged me along, saying I needed to get out more. I had been reluctant, but the second I saw her, I was grateful he had pushed me out of my comfort zone. She was standing by the bar, nursing a drink and looking utterly bored. Something about her pulled me in. Maybe it was the way she seemed so out of place, or maybe it was the sharp, almost defensive tilt of her chin. I walked up to her before I could overthink it. "Hi," I said. She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me want to turn and walk away. "Hi yourself," she said, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. That was all it took. We talked for hours that night about music, movies, the absurdity of nightclub culture. By the time the lights came on and the staff started ushering people out, I was smitten. Rochelle wasn't like anyone I had ever met. She was sharp, witty, and unflinchingly honest, but she was also guarded. Even in those early days, there was a part of her she kept hidden, a barrier I couldn't quite break through. We dated for 3 years before we got married. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. Our relationship was steady, grounded, built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect, or so I had thought. Looking back, there were signs that Rochelle wasn't entirely forthcoming. She rarely talked about her past, deflecting questions with a joke or a change of subject. She had friends, but didn't seem particularly close to any of them. And then there was her insistence on having her own space. When we started discussing marriage, she was clear on one point, and only one point. She needed a room of her own. "It's not that I don't want to share everything with you," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I just need a place where I can be alone." I didn't understand it, but I agreed. Love is about compromise, after all. Married life was good, for the most part. Rochelle was a wonderful partner, supportive, thoughtful, and kind. We settled into a comfortable routine, and I found myself thinking that I was one of the lucky ones. But her room remained off limits. She spent more time there than I had expected. Sometimes she would disappear for hours, and when she came out, she would be quiet, distant, as if she had been somewhere else entirely. I tried not to let it bother me. Everyone has their quirks, right? Still, I couldn't help but wonder what she did in there. I never asked, though. Part of me didn't want to know. It was a cold, rainy Friday evening when Rochelle came home from work, looking pale and unsteady. She brushed off my concern, insisting it was just a mild headache. But by the time dinner rolled around, she could barely sit upright. "I'm fine," she said, waving me off as I helped her to bed. She wasn't fine. Her skin was clammy, her breathing shallow, and her forehead burnt with fever. I stayed by her side, placing damp towel on her head and coaxing her to drink water. "You should go to bed," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I'm not leaving you like this," I said. She didn't argue, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease. As the hours passed, the air in the room grew heavy. I told myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling was impossible to ignore. The shadows seemed darker, the silence more oppressive. Rachel's breathing changed, growing deeper, heavier. She shifted restlessly, muttering under her breath. "Rachel?" I whispered, leaning closer. Her eyes snapped open, and for a moment I didn't recognize her. It wasn't just her fever that unnerved me, it was the way the atmosphere in the room shifted, as if the space itself had become alive. I felt it first as a pressure in my chest, then as a force that seemed to push against me, growing stronger with each passing second. My chair creaked as I leaned back, trying to resist the invisible weight. "Rachel," I said again, my voice trembling. She didn't respond. Her eyes were open, but they stared past me, unseeing. The pressure intensified, and I found myself sliding backward, my chair scraping against the floor. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like they were encased in concrete. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, her presence, filling the room, vast and unrelenting. It wasn't anger I felt, though. It was something else. Worry. "Don't stay," she whispered over the roaring in my ears. "Please don't stay." The force pushed me back until I hit the wall, pinned there by unseen hands. My chest burned as I struggled to breathe, my vision blurring. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. I slumped to the floor, gasping for air, and the last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was Rachel's face. When I woke up the next morning, I was in my own bed. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for a moment I wondered if I had dreamt the entire thing. But the ache in my chest and the pounding in my head told me otherwise. I found Rachel in the kitchen, humming softly as she made coffee. She looked perfectly fine, as if the fever had never happened. "Morning," she said, smiling at me. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Better, better," she replied. "Much better." I wanted to ask her about the night before, to demand answers, but something in her expression stopped me. She looked peaceful, content, as if she had made peace with something long ago. "Good," I said finally, forcing a smile. We never talked about that night again. Life went on, as it always does. Rachel returned to her routines, and I tried to do the same. But I couldn't shake the memory of that night, the weight of her presence, the fear in her voice. I found myself watching her more closely, searching for signs of something, but I didn't know what I was looking for. She was still the woman I married, still the woman I loved, and will always love. But there was a part of her I would never understand, a part she kept hidden behind the door of her room. I thought about confronting her several times, about demanding answers, but every time I tried, I remembered the pressure, the fear in her eyes, and I hesitated. Late at night, when the house is quiet and Rachel is asleep, I lie awake, staring at the ceiling. I think about the things we don't say to each other, the secrets we keep. I think about the love we share and the things I'm willing to overlook to keep it. And I wonder if I'll ever know what really happened that night. I wonder if I'll ever feel her presence again. And I wonder if, deep down, I'm better off not knowing.